Staying connected matters. That's why AT&T has connectivity you can depend on, or they'll proactively make it right. That's the AT&T guarantee. Terms and conditions apply. Visit att.com/guarantee for details. AT&T. Connecting changes everything. Suzy Welch, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I am delighted to be here.
Delighted to have you here. So just by way of background, this book you've written is based on a course you teach at the NYU Business School. Can you just tell me about the course itself and why it got so popular?
I can tell you about the first part. The second part, I can only speculate. The class is called Becoming You, Crafting the Authentic Life You Want and Need. And it's a class that started off as an experiment. I had this feeling that wouldn't it be great if there was a class for business school students that I wish I had taken, which helped you figure out what to do with your life, which can be simultaneously feel like there's too many options and there's not enough options. So I had created a methodology to help people walk through the process to what I call their area of transcendence, your purpose. The class does that. It walks students through a methodology of figuring out what your values are, which almost no one knows, your aptitudes, which slightly more people know, but it's pretty hard to know your aptitudes, and then your economically viable interests. And it's a real journey of data gathering, a self-reflection and data gathering. I think students in the old days used to take it hoping the class would be woo-woo, and it was not, because it's real mining for information. And then we put it all together, and students come up with their area of transcendence, their purpose. And on the last day of class, they stand up and they present the 40-year narrative of their life going forward if they were to take a journey to that area of transcendence. It did start as an experiment, and it didn't last as an experiment very long because there was a need for the class. I mean, that's what happened is students took it and said, this helped so much. And I said, that's fantastic. And NYU asked me, would you come and join the faculty and stick around and do this more? And I said, I will. And it took off from there. Yeah.
Is it your argument that what should I do with my life is a question that we should be asking throughout our lives, not just when we're young?
I mean, it's the work of our lives. It is the work of our lives. I think that otherwise, I mean, I like to say there's 3 Ds to it. You can live by default and just spend your entire life in kind of in react mode. And many of us do that. And I did it for long periods of my life because I'm human, but we can live in default, but that gets exhausting and can be discouraging. And it's not everybody's favorite place to be for good reason. And then as life goes on, sometimes we start to sprinkle the second D in. That's deliberation, kind of saying, okay, wait, this is maybe who I am, or this is maybe what I want. And I'm going to try to wrap my arms around this thing called life. And that's better. But there is this concept that you could live your life with more design, where you have a theory of yourself and you have a theory of your values and what you want to do with your life. And you will fall off the trail to that life because life does happen. But if you have a sense of where you're going, you will have fewer detours and hopefully live a more meaningful life along the way. So I do think it's, I've done Becoming You, the process with people from ages of 16 to 78. And I don't think that there's one right age to do it. I think there's an age where you're too young to do it, which is probably anything under 16. But I don't think there's any time not to be asking these questions. But I'm biased, I think.
I guess I'm biased too, because I would agree with you. You've used the word purpose, or I guess it's synonym areas of transcendence. You really do go out of your way to draw a distinction between purpose or areas of transcendence and happiness. Can you hold forth a little bit on that?
I mean, I have nothing against happiness. I mean, I would like everyone to be happy. I mean, I'm not I'm not opposed to it. I just am a person who understands that happiness has got a lot of components to it, and it can be fleeting, and you can have everything that might make you happy, and a lot of things can get in the way of it. I'm much more a believer that happiness is not a goal, but an outcome. Happiness is a byproduct of having your purpose. That if you have a meaningful, productive, and connected life, the byproduct is usually happiness, not always, but I think it's more sustainable to seek your purpose. And if happiness comes from that, great. But I've seen a lot of people in life chase happiness and end up thinking, oh, I should have been chasing my purpose all along. Because what is it to chase happiness? I didn't even know what it is. I think it's, maybe I'm just, drunk on my own Kool-Aid here, but I think there's just a lot more promise to trying to figure out what your purpose is. And almost everybody who is living in their purpose has a kind of exquisite aliveness, which is pretty much joy. So I'll take that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we even agree as a culture on what happiness is.
That's right. I don't think we do either, because I think, look, there's so much about values and, my happiness is not your happiness and all this other stuff. And that's why I like to take it out of the conversation entirely. And I joke about the happiness industrial complex. I also don't like the optimism peddlers. They also bother me, where people just sort of exhort you to be optimistic as if this is something you could, will yourself to be. I think these are all kind of band-aids, and that the from the beginning of time, the earliest philosophers just spoke about meaning and understanding what you are meant to do. And as you lean into it, there'll be good days and there'll be bad days, and there'll be great seasons and there'll be terrible seasons. But in general, it is the most fulfilling, and, it's the best path for us to take, because it has the highest likelihood of us feeling joy. And when we do that, we spread joy. But to pursue happiness, I don't know. I don't get it. I don't want, not to be a happiness naysayer, because of course I want everyone to be, and I'm happy sometimes. But I've definitely, had times where I've not been happy. And I think to exhort people to be happy is kind of crazy.
I think it really does depend on how you're defining happiness. My understanding of happiness, which again it's not a well understood or well defined concept, so it's a fuzzy conversation, like definitionally. But my understanding of happiness would include having a purpose.
Yes, I think we're probably directionally in agreement. I mean, I think that if you have a purpose, you're going to be happy, generally. Understanding your purpose, or by definition, and at least according to me, by definition, will mean you know what your values are. And so happiness is usually wrapped up in those.
Yes. I would also say, and this is a bit of a digression, we'll get back onto how we should figure out what to do with our lives in a second. But I would also say that happiness has other constituent parts that include things like sleep and the quality of your relationships and exercising, getting movement, access to nature, understanding yourself through therapy, training the mind through meditation. And these all work in concert. And so chasing that kind of happiness properly and broadly understood makes sense to me. But if you think of happiness superficially, as like they did in the old Toyota commercials, you leap for joy in the air every time you make a purchase, well, that's an unsustainable and shallow goal.
Yes. I mean, well, you've described these incredible components of well-being, and they're all connected. I just think that when you don't connect all the pieces and you're just going for something that you have this picture of in your head, that's a dangerous thing. Okay,
well, let me ask one more definitional question. How do we think about the word success, and how do we define that, measure that, track that as we grow up?
Yeah, it's different for each person. I mean, this is why we do so much work in Becoming You, to measure your own individual definition of success. I mean, there are 15 values, which I'm sure we'll get to. And one of those values is called achievement, which is seen success, what we would consider sort of professional, traditional success. And some people have a really high value on that, and some people don't. Some people, my own sister says to me all the time, I hate this winning and losing thing. And she just it got a different definition of success. So it's important for us to know what we think success is, but we can't know that unless we let go of the forces that are everywhere around us, around other definitions of success. We have to dig deep to find out what our own definition is. And I mean, that's also the work of our lives. I mean, to find out, to let go of what expectations are, and what our culture tells us, or what our spouse tells us success, or our parents tell us. You've got to know what our own definition of success is. And Becoming You forces you to do that. And if, I shouldn't use the word force. It's a voluntary protocol. It impels you to do that.
There's no waterboarding.
No one is forced to take Becoming You. It remains an elective at NYU. So,
those moments when someone just takes care of something for you? That's what AT&T is doing with the AT&T Guarantee. Staying connected matters. That's why AT&T has connectivity you can depend on, or they will proactively make it right. That's the AT&T Guarantee. Because staying connected isn't optional, it's essential. And AT&T wants you to feel that somebody's got your back. Terms and conditions apply. Visit att.com/guarantee for details. AT&T, connecting changes everything.
All right. Well, so you mentioned before there are these kind of three areas to look at and explore as part of understanding like who you are and what you want to do with whatever time you have on this planet. And the three parts are values, aptitudes, and economically viable interests. So let's just march through these if you're up for it. So this is probably an obvious question, but I just want you to define it. What do you mean by values?
Oh, it is such a complicated term. I mean, values. I did research that showed that only 17% of people can actually identify what a value is. The problem is that values is a term that's been hijacked by politics, family values, conservative values, progressive values. And, you can go to high school and you can learn how to calculate the volume of a cylinder and you won't learn what values are. So just for definitional purposes, values are the deeply held beliefs that galvanize our actions and decisions. They're what we believe. Everybody, I believe there's 15 core values. There's several different values inventories. For some crazy reason, I like my own the best. It's got 15. And we each have some level of each one of these 15 values. Now, the thing is that people often mix up values with virtues. I had a student one time and I asked her what her values were coming into the class and she said, kindness and fairness. I said, those are wonderful virtues, but they are not values. And so we have to get clear on what values are. And look, I want to say very few people actually can name their values. 7% typically can name their values with any clarity and specificity. I was doing an interview the other day on TV and I was talking about this. And as I was walking out, the sound guy grabbed me as he was taking off my mic. And he said, hey, I have a values test. He said, where can I take your values test again? I told him. And I said to him, by the way, what do you think your values are now? And before you go and find out for sure. And he said, well, family for sure. And, love, technically not a value, by the way. Love, he said, and for sure, friends. And I said, okay, great. Take the test, because these are the problem with values is we always just come back to the big three, which I say are family, friends, and love. Family can certainly be a value. We happen to call it family centrism because of it becomes an organizing principle for your life. And, friends is a value we call belonging. Okay. Connectivity. But love, like, what does it mean to have love, be a value? It's caught up in a lot of different values. Okay. So I think that values actually, which should be very clear, and we should all be talking about values with a shared language, but we don't. Values are hard and complicated. And a lot of times we kind of have a sense of our values, but we spend our whole life kind of dodging around them. And sometimes that happens because we are in a relationship with a parent or a partner who doesn't share our values, who subtly or not so subtly asks us to sublimate our values. Sometimes we're in a culture that doesn't share our values. Sometimes events get in the way of our values. Sometimes expedience gets in the way of our values. We could be a person who really values something we call scope, which is excitement, energy, new experiences, new people. And we could have that as a top value. And we could go live in a sleepy suburb because it's easier to get our groceries in from the driveway in the suburbs, and therefore completely sublimating a top value for ourselves because of expedience. So values are not easy to define and messy. And that's why we do so many exercises around them, because you can't go straight in. You can't just ask somebody. It's not like asking somebody, what's your name? You have to ask from a lot of different angles.
This may be an unfair question, but can you run through the 15 values that you've identified?
Nothing would make me happier. Yeah, I'd love to. Okay. All right, so
but it's a lot to remember. That's why I
know them by heart. Are you kidding me?
Okay.
Okay. So the first one that we just mentioned is scope, which is a measure of, and all of these would be defined as an organizing principle of your life. What impels you to do stuff? Okay. So the first one you say would be scope, and that's like a measure of how much you want stimulation. I had a student described scope as wanting to touch everybody's brain. It's sort of the Bianca Jagger on the back of a white horse going into Studio 54, dream of your life. You want excitement, new experiences. You'll take the chaos. Now, low scope life is, I want predictability and routine, and you'll trade off what could be the boredom of it because you want control. You want to know where you're going to be at 2:00 this day, 1 year from now. Okay. So that's scope. All of these exist on a continuum. You can have high or low. I mean, we actually measure exactly how much you have, but all right. So another value is radius. And this is if your life was a bomb and you dropped it on the earth, how big a crater would it leave? This is, our social justice warriors among us, like my daughter, that very, very high radius. You want to change the world. And there's other people for whom changing the world is just of no interest to them. It's not a value. It's not something they hold dear. When they're making a decision or they're deciding what they're going to do on Saturday, they're not being driven by this desire to change the world. Okay, that's the second one. Family centrism. How much family is your first, second, and third priority? Every decision and action you make is about family. Sometimes we express values, and whether or not we really want to be expressing them is another question. Value of belonging, I mentioned. That's about how much you care about your friends, connection, community, how much you want to be in a group. And some people, that's incredibly high value. You know, somebody who goes to 16 weddings a year, you know, they probably got belonging off the charts. And other people sort of, they got one person. They got they're a two-person universe, or they like to be by themselves. Again, a continuum. Cosmos is a value of your faith. This is one of the most traditional values in all the values inventories, is how much your organizing principle in your life is your own God from your own religious tradition, not one or the other, but not, you know, this is not faith specific, but God is an organizing principle and your religion. Agency is the value continuum that measures self-determination and how important self-determination is, that you drive your own bus. I happen to be very low on agency, but I certainly have been in life and surrounded by people with very high agency. They've got to be the author. No one is the boss of them. People who are very low on agency tend to be very high on collaboration. Beholderism is a value that is a reflection of how important it is to you that how things look, including yourself. I mean, this is in the earliest values inventories from 100 years ago, when there were two great academics named Alport and Strang created the first values inventory. They called it aestheticism, but I call it beholderism because it's a easier word to grasp. But it's caring. How much do you care about how things look, your spaces, your stuff, yourself? That can drive what you do on vacation, who you marry, where you work, you know, what you're doing on side, everything. It's a value, and you can have it very high and you can have it very low. Would you like me to go on? Another value is non-sibi. This is the Latin phrase for not oneself. And this is the values continuum that captures how much you're motivated by helping people. Just want to help people. I've had students say to me, I don't care what company I work at, what industry I work in. I don't care about any of that. I've got to be helping people day in and day out. You know, and some people I've met other people in doing this work thousands of times who it's not like they don't want to help people. It's just not their organizing principle. They don't think about it when they're organizing what kind of job they want, what kind of person they're getting married to, anything. And so it's not many other values inventories call it altruism. I like to take those words away because I don't want us to be judgy about values. I'm a values agnostic. You have a right to whatever values you want in whatever level you want. If you're not hurting anybody, your values are your values. All you need to do is live them if you want to be authentic. Work centrism is another value. It's a value of how much work is an organizing principle of our life. I mean, for me, work centrism is off the charts. I love my work. I would work 24/7 if I didn't have dogs. And for other people, for instance, my 4 children, work centrism is just not the organizing principle of their life. They work. They all enjoy working, but it's not how they think. I mean, they work as a means to an end. And that's a value. People who have high work centrism like me have been called workaholics our whole life. And I've always thought to myself, a holic, it's not a disease to me. It's my value. I like working. I'm not hurting anybody. So some people have high work. The one thing I would say is just be in a partnered relationship with somebody who respects your level of work centrism or shares it. Then there's money. We call that value affluence in the Becoming You lexicon. And, everybody has a number. Everybody says that financial security is a value. But the truth is that what financial security is to one person is not to another person. I've had people go through this process and say, look, my value is financial security. I just want to be able to rent an apartment near my store. And I've had other people say, and I'm not kidding, not making this up, they want a helipad per child. And they both would tell you the financial security is a value. So we measure, and you have to know the number because you have to be honest with it about yourself and with other people so you can explain yourself. And again, if you're not hurting anybody, you have a right to however much affluence matters to you. There's the value that I mentioned before of achievement. That's seen success, how much you want to be seen by the world as a successful person in conventional terms. And for some people, that's a driving. I certainly have had MBA students for that's number one value. But I've also had MBA students for which it's not a value at all. And when they see that result come back, they're like, yeah, no wonder I feel like I'm wearing a suit that's 3 sizes too small every day. Luminance is the value of fame, a celebrity, how famous you want to be. We're in a generation where 75% of people have said that they want to be influencers as their job. I mean, fame is a value, and some people want to live off the grid and they hate it if they're recognized and known, and other people just can't wait for that day to occur. That's a value. We're closing in on the last 3. There's the value of voice, which is creative self-expression. Authenticity would be another word for this. How much do you want to let your freak flag fly? How much do you want to stand out? How much do you feel like by definition, whenever I have an artist going through the becoming you process, whenever there's an artist going through it, I always think, oh, here's going to be somebody whose voice is going to be number one or number two. And it's almost invariably number one or number two. Here's the thing. One of my tools measures how much you have of a value. And the tool also measures how much you're expressing it, living it. And I can't tell you how often I get young women, typically women of color, very unfortunately, who have voice as a value of number one or number two, but how much they're living it, the variance between how much they have it and how much they're living it can be up to 98, 99%. Okay, then comes the value, a very controversial value whenever I talk about it, of what I call eudaimonia. That's Greek for flourishing. It's self-care. It's pleasure. It's leisure. In some people, it presents as sex. It's how much you want to feel good. I come from a generation where eudaimonia was what you got when you did everything else. But we are entering a different time where, many of my students in some classes, more than 60% of them have eudaimonia as their number one value. They do not want to postpone joy. They don't want to postpone feeling good. You can't blame them given what they've seen in this world. And then the final value that we measure for that I think is part of that I know is part of my values inventory and I think is lacking in other values inventories, to nerd out on you, is the value of place, where you want to live. You've seen many people whose lives have been driven by just saying, look, I'm not leaving Milwaukee. But there's other people who really have a very like, I don't care where I live. I'll go where I want to be a nomad. I want to try every place. I don't really care. And how strongly you feel about where you live is actually a value. Because why? Because it can drive your actions and your decisions in a way. And so those are the 15 values. And I think it's often incredibly transformative for people to do a couple of things. One is to have a language to talk about what really matters to them, to know what the actual ranking of these values is for them. We have to do behavioral questions to get to that because, of course, there's a lot of noise in our head. I had to change it to behavioral questions, the test, because I used to see students go through all the exercises and then family centrism would be down at like number 11 or 12 and you would see them kind of cringe and physically move it up. Because they were thinking about their mother's face when they said it. And so, and then it's very, very important for us to find out how closely we're living with each one of those values. What's our variance on each one? This is all data that we need to know if we want to figure out what our purpose is.
And you said there's a place where we can go to test this?
Yes, you can. You could take it. I created this test. For a long time, I tried to do this test in class, like with like a Qualtrics survey and so forth. And I used to stand up in front of my class with an abacus. We have actually a picture of me like moving the abacus of beads around. And finally, I was talking to my PhD thesis advisor about this. And I think the technical term was I was bitching and moaning about how I couldn't stand that this tool did not exist. And he's a British guy in his very plummy British accent said to me, I'm not going to swear on your show, but he said to me, why don't you just go effing do it?
And I said, can swear on this show, just to be
okay,
clear.
well, you got it. He said, why don't you go fucking do it, Suzy? And I said to him, what, make the values inventory in the test? And he said, I'm sick of hearing you complain about it. This inventory does not exist. You have thousands of pieces of evidence that prove it should exist. I was doing it literally. Students were taking it like on a simple, computer form. He said, you got to go make the tool. And I did. I committed a couple of years of my life to making it. And now it's fully out there. It's called the Values Bridge. And you can just go online and type in the Values Bridge or in Becoming You and you can take the test.
I think it's fascinating. And honestly, I don't I don't think I've ever really thought about it. I as listeners have heard me say many times, I have a tattoo on my left wrist that reminds me of the Buddhist goal of benefiting all beings. And so I do try to organize my life around that principle.
I would bet then if that's true, it'd be interesting to see where that showed up in the test. I think it's probably radius, which is that value of wanting to change the world that often shows up as a care for all humanity, which I think is what you're saying, or it could show up as non-city. The test would tell you they're related. I got to believe it's probably one of your top values.
Well, I've been trying, I don't think it was for most of my life. I've been trying to steer the ship in that direction. And I notice when I'm in that mode, a lot of the bullshit slides away and I'm not perseverating on things that make me miserable.
I'm going to lovingly and gently push back for a moment and say,
please.
I actually think our values are very stable. And my guess is that it was always a value of yours, probably from when you were a young boy and you sublimated it and crushed it and denied it. And finally, when you started living it, you felt authentic. And so then you said, okay, now I'm going to let it steer the ship because I should have been letting it steer the ship my whole life long.
It's really interesting. Yesterday, I was at a New York Times event in Brooklyn, and they had all these folks from the wellness world at this event. And one of them was this guy who's never been on the show. I don't know why. Terry Real. He's quite a well-known couples counselor. I don't know if that would be his preferred branding, but anyway, that's what I think of him as. And he was on stage saying something that this may sound like a digression, and I apologize if it is. But he was saying that one of the biggest problems in the couples he works with is that heterosexual women often justifiably want of heterosexual men a level of open-heartedness that heterosexual men are not trained to exhibit or to have, because people like me with my chromosomal structure and come up through, and maybe this is a little bit better now, but certainly when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, caring was not a thing you were trained to value, to make an operating principle of your life, at least not in the culture that I was imbibing. So yeah, maybe it was latent, crushed by what some people call toxic masculinity. And later in my life, I've been able to nurture it to the best of my ability.
That's good. I have to say that I end up doing a lot of couples work, because what happens is when people take the test, there's a place where you can check a box. And if somebody else takes the test, e.g. a partner, your values come up right along next to each other, and it shows you the level of harmony or conflict your values have. And the other thing is that you get this number at the end that tells you how far or how close you are to living your values. And when I was first testing this tool, one of my sneaky things to do would be to invite over my colleagues from the management and organizations department at NYU, and I'd tell them it was a dinner party, and I'd invite all my colleagues and their spouses. And then at the end, I'd say, surprise, let's try my new psychometric tool. And they'd be, oh God, Suzy, but they took it. They were good sports. And then I had to stop doing it, because what would happen is one member of the partnership would get a variance at the end of like 7%. You're living very close to your values. You're living an authentic life. And the other member of the couple would get like a 98% variance. And there'd be this sort of stunned silence. They knew exactly what was going on. And one time this happened, and the wife was very close to her authenticity in this case, and the husband was very far away from it. And there was this long pause in which I thought to myself, never do this again, you idiot. But anyway, in that moment, the husband said, yes, that is correct. We are living Mary's dream of a life. There's a lot of different ways to think about this and talk about it. But one is when there's just a complete values disconnect, which often happens for all the reasons you described, that there's a lot of things in cultures that makes us disconnect from our own values, but also not understand our partner's values.
All right, I could spend a lot more time here, but in the interest of time, just to reset for us, we're working through the 3 parts of the Becoming You protocol. The first part is values. So the second part is aptitudes. What do you mean by aptitudes?
Aptitudes are two different, there's 2 different ways I define aptitudes. This is your cognitive wiring, which shows up in 2 ways. There's sort of, social scientists would agree, there's 8 big cognitive wirings. Is our brains wired to be generalists or specialists? Are we brainstormers, or what's politely called idea contributors, which are people who don't spew ideas? Are we future focusers or present focusers? And this is good to know. There's no right or wrong. There's just right or wrong for your job. And yet we often don't know this data about ourselves at all. But I can't tell you the number of times people come to me in misery, and it's the fix is quite easily. They're easy because they're a specialist in a generalist job, or they're in a job that demands a constant production of ideas. They're not brainstormers. They have other gifts. So the first part of this work is to get a grip, and it's very easy to test for this, get a grip on where you are with the 8 big cognitive aptitudes. Where it gets complicated, and it gets very complicated, is that another part of your aptitude profile is your personality. What kind of job you have, and typically our purpose sort of shows up in our job, or we would like it to, because this is what we do most of the day. You could be really good in your job because of your personality, or you could be really bad at your job because of your personality. And I consider personality traits, some of them, aptitudes. And so what we do as part of the Becoming You process is we test, because a lot of people, everybody tells you what their personality is. Oh, I'm a good listener. I'm compassionate. I'm very kind. I'm funny, right? And that's maybe true, but actually your personality is how the world experiences you. And this is an incredibly hard message for my students to hear. And I think my older students, when I'm teaching this in workshops and I've got somebody who's 50 or 60, they're like, yep, because you spend your whole life learning how the world experiences you. And, I am like a poster child for this, because when first time I taught Becoming You, I thought, I'm going to go and take it along with my students. I'm going to find out how the world experiences me, which must be simply fabulous, because I am fabulous in every possible way. And so I went through the C60 feedback. Now, this was a very complicated period in my life. When I did this, my husband had just died and I was selling our house and moving into a new house, and things were chaotic, to put it mildly, because when you lose somebody, things are generally chaotic. But I thought to myself, everybody around me understands that I am the eye at the center of the hurricane. I got this, and everybody understands that it looks chaotic, but Suzy is calm. And then I got back my 360 feedback, and no. When I got back my 360 feedback, I found out that people experienced me as the hurricane. And I had to come to terms with the fact that everything I was telling myself about how the world was experiencing me was a lie I was telling myself. And I needed to, if I wanted to be the person I thought I was, I had to change. And I'm happy to say I've downgraded myself to a tropical storm. I have. And the reason I know is I am constantly and trying to understand how I'm being experienced, which is important because I have mixing with people in the world all the time. And it's important for me as a teacher to know how I'm being experienced. So aptitudes are how your brain's wired and how your personality is being experienced by the world. Again, in pursuit of understanding yourself well enough, standing still so that you can figure out what's the right direction to go in when you start running again. We never do it. We never figure out who we are when we're standing still. Maybe very enlightened folks like you do, but most people do not figure out who they are standing still until they have to, like a crisis happens.
You know what I'm really picky about? I am really picky about pillows. I have this problem when I'm in hotel rooms. Rarely do they have the type of pillow that I want. I sleep on my side, and I want to have some support from my neck, but I actually kind of want it to be soft too. You know what I'm talking about? Anyway, you probably have your own preferences. I've got a fix though. It's a company called Coop, and I got one of their pillows recently, and I slept on it last night, and I was talking to my wife about it this morning. This thing is awesome, and it's going to be my go-to pillow. In fact, they sent me two. I'm going to keep it in two different spots in the house, and if anybody takes it, I'm going to cut them. It's not only an incredibly comfortable pillow, which you can customize because they send you extra stuffing. I'm not sure that's the right word, but they send you extra stuff that you can put in the pillow if it's not thick or fluffy enough for you on first blush. Actually, it was perfect for me right out of the box. So the pillows are not only comfortable, but they're also cool. And by cool, I don't mean like awesome, although they are awesome, but I mean thermally cool. Did you know that your body needs to drop 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit in order to fall asleep? If you're sleeping hot and sweaty, it is impossible to get a good night's rest. And if your solutions are blasting the AC on high or just doing constant pillow flips, you really should check out Coop Sleep Goods. Sleep is just incredibly important when it comes to human flourishing or basic well-being. As I often say, it's the apex predator of healthy habits. Nothing good happens if you're not sleeping, and Coop Sleep Goods has a lot to offer. They even do this thing where they give you a free pillow consultation with a sleep expert to help you optimize your sleep. The pillows come with a 100-night free trial. 86% of sleepers reported better sleep after switching their pillows to Coop. 100,000 plus 5-star reviews and over 1 million happy sleepers. Upgrade your sleep. Visit coopsleepgoods.com/happier10, happier10. To get 20% off your first order. That's coopsleepgoods.com, happier10.
You mentioned 360 feedback. Just want to make sure everybody knows what that is. The way it works is generally in a corporate setting. It's an anonymous survey of your bosses, peers, and direct reports to get a panoramic sense of your strengths and weaknesses. You may not know this, Suzy, but I went through a 360 review back in 2008. That included people from both of my places of employment at that time, a startup that I had co-founded, and ABC News, and then also my wife, my brother, and 2 of my meditation teachers. And the results were not great.
That's right.
I then went back through another 360 3 years later, and it was really quite different.
Right.
Probably due for another one. And so,
all right. You know what I want to just say here is that the problem is that you can't get 360 out in the world and take it or leave it. But I got so mad about that I created a cheap little tool for people to administer their own 360, because, why should 360 be only for people who work at IBM and, yes. And fancy companies? So, pi360.com, very cheap as a cup of coffee.
Pi 360?
Pi 360. PIE.
PIE.
Yeah, you know
okay.
why why it's called that? It's called that because it tests how people, it takes 5 minutes to do for your raters. And it asks them, how does this person get along with people? What's the quality of this person's ideas, and how well do they get things done, execution? And it takes 5 minutes, very cheap, and you can find out with up to 40 people how the world experiences you. Because I got mad because I'd be out in the world talking about this process, and people say, yeah, it's great. I don't work at IBM. I can't get 360 feedback. What am I supposed to do? Go up to everybody and ask them how they experience me? And I said, look, there's got to be a tool that does this. And there wasn't. And I'm lucky I've got a lab, and I was able to create the tool.
Very cool. You've talked about several types of tests. We talked about 360, but you also mentioned that we may want to test our aptitudes and our personality.
I think Pi 360 tests your personality. I think that there's another test that I did not develop. It's an old test. It's called, it's not old, but it's a very solid test. It's called U Science. YOU Science. You can find it at uscience.com. It's a little pricey. I think it's $40. All my students take it, and it will just give you an absolute read on all of your cognitive aptitudes. It's money well spent. I have no skin in the game with it whatsoever. But it's a terrific test, and it tests your aptitudes. Now, look, the world may, my book is set up so that you don't have to take any of these tests, right? Because not everyone can take tests, and it walks you through exercises you could just do with a pen and paper to figure out these things. If it all sounds like it's just too expensive and too complicated, I try to simple it down because not everyone can do it. Not everyone likes to take tests.
Can you just walk us through one of those exercises?
Well, for aptitudes or for values, I can do either one.
Aptitudes.
Okay, so for aptitudes, you can do U Science without the actual $30 or $40 test, although I highly recommend it because what you can do is just understand, for instance, that there are some people, all 8 aptitudes are described. For instance, one that I mentioned, which is really important to know about your brain, is whether or not you're a generalist who likes to know a little bit about everything and, sort of just wants to know what they need to know and kind of wants to know a fact about everything, versus a specialist who is a person who wants to bore down deeply into topics and, sort of wants to research and, find out like, I'm really, I have a son who's a specialist and he's a classic specialist and, he loves music and he knows absolutely every single thing about his type of music that he loves, every artist that's ever been in it, every, buys vinyl albums. And yet, when you go out to dinner with him and you start saying like, wow, did you just hear about the new Pope? He may not know about it. Okay. I mean, the generalists and specialists, I think when you read the descriptions of each one of the cognitive aptitudes, most people can, with a description, pretty easily say, oh my God, this explains it. I'm 100% a sequential thinker, not a process supporter. You say, oh yeah. No wonder that job was so hard for me. The analogy I like is that, when you sign your name with your dominant hand, it feels very natural. You could do it all day long, easy and fun. But if you put that pen in your non-dominant hand, you would eventually, with practice, be able to sign your name. It would never be natural. It would never be fun. It would never look exactly right. And when we're thinking about what we want to do with our lives, we can use the dominant hand of our brains or the non-dominant hand of our brains. And my thesis is that it's usually a lot more comfortable, enjoyable, and successful, just emotionally, to be working in concert with your aptitudes rather than against them.
Yeah, not cutting against the grain. I in my notes here, I have the names of some of the other sort of thought experiments or contemplative exercises that you recommend, and I don't know if they're relevant to aptitudes or values or the next bucket, which is economically viable interest, but some of them they have names like 6 Squared or Whose Life or Alpha Omega or Exploring Fears. Are any of these worth dwelling on now just for a little bit?
They're all values exercises. I love them all. I'm happy to talk about any of them.
If they're all values oriented, since we've already covered that, let's come back to it later. Is there more to say about aptitudes before we move on to EVI, economically viable interests?
I mean, I would just say this about aptitudes, which is sometimes you end up doing work for many more years and sometimes for your whole life long that is not it's not an aptitude. It does not fit with your personality. It's not fit with the way your brain is wired, and you do it because of expedience or you do it because of expectations. It can cause a great deal of discomfort and self-doubt. And it's actually a pretty easy fix. The data is there for us to get. And it's just, so many people are pushed into, I see this all the time. People are pushed into banking or consulting and they're like, I wanted to be an artist. And they're wired to be artists, and yet we do this to ourselves. And it's as old as time. The difference now is there's ways to test and to have a language then to say, look, I'm a specialist. I shouldn't be doing this work. I'm an inductive reasoner. I shouldn't be doing this work.
It's enormously powerful. Okay, so the third area to think about as we're considering what we should be doing with our lives is economically viable interests. I think it's a little bit self-explanatory, but can you explain it nonetheless?
You got to work. I mean, all of this would just be, most people have got to work. Okay. And so you got to then pick where you're going to work. And what ends up happening in life is our aperture gets smaller and smaller about what kind of work even exists. And there's great research that shows that when kids are coming out of high school, they're aware of 7 jobs on average. Okay. Most kids coming out of high school in America today know about 7 jobs, 2 of which their parents hold. And then the rest they sort of see: fireman, teacher, whatever. And you would think that number would really bump up if and when kids went to college. And what ends up happening is they go to college, but then groupthink sets in. And people start saying the jobs are in tech or the jobs are in hospitality. And it doesn't really get much bigger. Sort of in college, the research shows that young people know between 9 and 11 jobs. And then as time goes on, once people are in their 30s, the same research would show you that people are down to sort of 3 or 4 viable jobs for themselves. Whereas the truth of the matter is there's 135 industries. There's 12 identified megatrends. These are sort of the industries coming around the bend. When I first started teaching Becoming You, AI wasn't even a megatrend. And here it is. And then like the second year, AI was a megatrend, and then it was everything. So the idea is to make sure we haven't shut our aperture prematurely or for no reason, and to understand how big the economy is and how many different types of jobs there are and how many different kinds of work there are, and to get ourselves, if we happen to be on a conveyor belt towards a certain kind of career, to understand that we can limit ourselves too much. So, but for other people, there are certain kinds of work that call them intellectually or emotionally, but it has to be able to pay you according to what your value around affluence is. So it's both a understanding how big the economy is and also a listening to yourself about what is calling you.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's a Venn diagram here of, what do I care about? What am I good at? And what am I like? And what kind of work is available?
Yes, there is a Venn diagram. I mean, it looks like a Venn diagram.
She's holding up a Venn diagram.
There is the Venn diagram. And it's exactly what you do. We march through it. We do all the excavation work of it. The book does that. I do that in class. And it's kind of an amazing cathartic experience. It's not always, I mean, most people really enjoy it. I don't want to, but the class does have the nickname, the class where everyone cries. Sometimes I wonder if if I don't have a class where people are crying, I'm like, what am I doing wrong here? I mean, this can really stir up a lot of emotions.
Yeah. Well, it is a huge question. What should you do with your life?
Yeah.
Back in 2005, I think I was asked by my alma mater to give a commencement speech. And I think I gave shitty advice. I said, follow your passion, figure out.
Oh, no.
And go. Really?
Bad advice, right? Yeah, bad shitty advice.
And I've had many guests who have pointed that out to me. So, what's the counter argument against that? What's the right advice?
If you're good at your passion, do it. Okay, but the problem is a lot of people I want to be look, the simplest thing, I want to be a rock star. That's like, I'm so passionate about music, you're just not good at it. And so that's why I've got a Venn diagram. I mean, your values often surface, or your interest often surface what your passion is, but that's why we got aptitudes in there. You got to be able to do it. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up to fail, really. Look, I know a guy. And he went to college and he wanted nothing more to be a TV writer. Okay. Wanted to be a TV writer, went to Hollywood right after college, obsessed, right? It's been 15 years now. He's not sold a single script. He has all these odd jobs. He works at, the Gap. He blew up balloons in the mall. He's chasing his passion. And the world has told him over and over again, what you are passionate about, the world cannot actually, does not want to receive. Now, luckily, his value of affluence is very low. He just doesn't care about money. And so he may continue chasing his passion, but he's not happy. He's now having a lot of self-doubt. He's sort of in a crisis. And it's like I have gently said to him, I think the aptitude part is the problem here. I always say I'm not the AOT police. I'm not coming to get you if you don't live, by your values, aptitudes, and economically viable interests. I'm just telling you that this is one way to think about how to live that might be that might get you to your purpose, which feels, again, exquisitely alive with less torment. What I would say to graduates, and I'm actually giving a graduation speech coming up, is you should know your passions, but it's not enough.
I'm pretty strongly inclined to agree with you. And if I could go back to 2005, 20 years ago, I wouldn't say that shit again. I do want to go back to a few points that we discussed earlier. One of them is this is not just for people who are going to business school and are in their 20s.
There's not a demographic I haven't done this with. It's interesting. I think I have a group of folks who really love this process who are moms, and they're working mothers generally, or working parents, but the ones that I find are moms who are like, okay, like I gave up this piece of myself because I'm going through that process. I'm in that period of my life where my kids need all of me and my work needs all of me, and I can't figure out who I am or what I should be doing. So, I mean, I think that I've gone through this process with many women in their late 30s, early 40s, and even into their early 50s who are struggling with what is it that I really should be doing? Because each day they get up and they kind of relitigate what they're going to be doing. So that's a big demographic for Becoming You. I have, for some reason, into my workshops, I get a lot of men in their 40s. I think 40 is sort of when they're like, is this all there is? So for some reason, architects, product managers, sort of men in their 40s show up and do the workshop and say, yep, okay. It has to be a reset here. Sometimes people love this, love going through this protocol, as you call it. I'm going to steal that word, who are just retired. And they go, okay, I'm going into my, my third half, if you will. And I don't want to blow it. I don't want to blow it. What are my values? What are my aptitudes? What am I interested in? And they use it in a totally different way. They're not looking for paid work, but they're looking for what to do next. A lot of times my students who are in their 20s and early 30s use it. And then, 2 years later, they come back to me and they say, okay, I tried that, and on to the next thing, or my favorite email subject line being, you told me so. And so they come back and their AOT analysis had told them to do one thing and they did something else. And then a couple of years later, they come back and say, okay, let's talk about it again.
Yeah, I was having dinner last night with a new friend of mine who's 55 and trying to figure out what to do. He, did a bunch of stuff in his career, and he doesn't feel he's ever really found his area of transcendence, and is feeling a little bit like he's running out of time. I'm literally going to send him this book after this conversation.
I think that I get a lot of people who present exactly as he does, and it sort of happens at 55, and in fact, often 60 is the number. And people are like, this shit's real. Like the clock is now ticking. I hear it. I may have 30 more years, but I don't want to waste them because I have not been, and I get that. I would get it. I have had whole workshops filled with people in their 50s and 60s.
I also have a lot of friends who are, in their 70s and 80s who, just as you described, who've retired. And it's potentially a huge crisis for people, because these were many of my friends who were the top executives at ABC News when I was a plankton at the organization, and are trying to figure out, like, what do you do with your life at this point? And it can really mess people up.
It really can. It can. And I've seen them come back once they get the language of values, because it's sort of like the scales fall from their eyes and say, oh my God, all along this was about radius, or all along this was about cosmos or agency. And I just didn't get it. But now I can. It's it's like Wittgenstein said, and I don't go around quoting German philosophers very often, in fact, never, but I quote this one because it is really on point, which is that the limits of my language are the limits of my world. The limits of my language are the limits of my world. As soon as we get words for it, then our world can start to write itself.
Few things feel better than knowing someone's looking out for you. That is the spirit behind the AT&T Guarantee. Staying connected matters. That's why AT&T has connectivity you can depend on, or they will proactively make it right. That's the AT&T Guarantee, because connection should be dependable, especially in the moments that matter most. Terms and conditions apply. Visit att.com/guarantee for details. AT&T, connecting changes everything.
You have an expression that I think was coined not by Wittgenstein or any other German philosopher, that I think was coined by you. Whoever said it, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. People are incredibly complicated and incredibly simple at the same time.
So yes, I said it. This non-German philosopher over here said it. Look, one time I was giving a speech about becoming you, and afterwards, I stayed and answered questions for people who didn't get their questions answered. And there was this one couple, and they looked very grim. And I was like, oh, SpaghettiOs, what did I say? And they kept on moving themselves to the back of the line. They wanted to be last. And finally, after an hour of sort of talking to people individually, I was alone with them in the conference hall, and they said, "Do you think people are good or bad?" I was really exhausted. And I said to him, look, well, I was a reporter at the Miami Herald covering crime for 4 years. I've seen some stuff, but I think people are generally good. And, I think the center will hold. And I sort of told them a little bit about what I believed. And they said, well, we were just wondering where you were coming from because you're asking us to go on this journey with you. And I thought, oh, yeah, okay, I think I better tell people where I'm coming from. And so what you just quoted was one of the premises or one of my sort of fundamental beliefs, which is that you can't make a blanket statement about human nature. That people are incredibly simple. They do want in my experience, everybody wants to feel safe. Everyone wants to feel loved. Everyone wants to feel heard. But then people can be just absolute, as I love to call them, messy mess balls. People are just complete messy mess balls, me included, and we're complicated. And becoming you is in one way just a way to try to unmess the messiness of it all, so that we can do something. Because otherwise, you can't throw in the towel and say we're all simple and we're all complicated. Let's just figure out a way to get as close to living authentically as we can.
Well said. Another thing I want to double click on here is, and this is related to 360 feedback, but I think it's universally important and overarching. And you spend quite a bit of time on it. And I'd love to hear you say a little bit more about it here, which is just the role of relationships generally as it relates to our purpose and the way what we're going to do with our lives.
A lot of people who go through becoming you are in relationship. And what typically happens is they go through becoming you, and the next time I see them, they're showing up either going through a workshop or whatever with the person they're in relationship with. Because once you know your values, you want to talk about them with the person you're in relationship with. But if it's not a partner, it can be a boss, it could be a business partner, it can be a child. And one of the reasons I like people doing the process in group is because they need to have a language. And one of the proudest moments of my entire career, sorry for the cringe here, but one of my proudest moments was when a woman in her 60s came to one of my workshops, and she wrote me afterwards, and she said, I went home and I had the first conversation with my adult children in about 15 years, because I could talk to them about values in a language that didn't make us all angry at each other. So that having been said, I had been in relationship my entire life. I got married very, very young. Then I got divorced, my first divorce. And then I met my husband. I had 4 children at that time, so I was never really ever alone. And then I met my second husband, and we had a long and happy marriage until he passed away in 2020. And so for the last 5.5 years, I've not been in any relationship. It's very, very interesting to take the world on where you can actually, for the first time, live my values and express my values without having to negotiate my values. And so I've seen both sides of the coin, and I have deep appreciation for how much negotiating I did around my values all the previous, 60 years of my life when I was either in a relationship. My kids are grown now. They know the language. We talk about this all the time, but to just live your values kind of outside of relationship is kind of an interesting experience. But almost the vast majority of times when I'm doing this, it's people who are talking about their values vis-a-vis somebody else's values.
Yeah, I think that's all really true and important. And whatever you do with your life, you're going to need good relationships at every level in your life, including with your colleagues and your bosses and people who work for you, your peers, your direct reports, your superiors, your friends. Like, the relationships are the lifeblood of the human animal. And so we need to pay attention to it.
Well, I say that I agree with you, although the sort of rise of tech has proven to us something that was never previously true in the history of humanity, which is you could be successful and be bad at people. That's what we've learned. Up until just, very recent times, if you just were terrible at the people part, it actually hurt you. The only people who ever got away with that before the rise of the technocracy were artists. Pablo Picasso was just a total jerk kind of thing. And so I would say that my theory that I teach my management students is that 3 things drive success long term: the quality of your relationships, like you just said, but also I think your ideas. You have to have a couple of good ideas, or you have to be able to have the openness of your heart and mind to shepherd other people's ideas, or to support them, or to tease them out. So you have to have something around your brain being engaged in the game. And then finally, the ability to get things done, execute, as I say. But yeah, people matter. Although I feel, when I was in business school back in, graduated in 88, people, your relationships, your EQ really mattered. And then suddenly the world went to technology, and we saw the rise of this sort of uber mogul who could just be an utter and complete asshole and still be wildly successful.
You sometimes hear talk, and sometimes that talk is coming from me, although I don't really know, but at least you hear the theory floated that going forward in the era of AI, EQ or emotional intelligence will become more important. It may not apply to Elon Musk, but for most of us, lots of jobs will become commodified and automated. So those of us who remain in the workplace are going to need to have very human skills. Does that land for you?
I hope it's true. I hope it's true. I don't know if it is. I mean, I think it's kind of a little wishful thinking.
Maybe.
I hope it's true. I mean, maybe what happens with AI is that at a certain point we just get tired of talking to a machine, and we just remember that the funnest, best thing is just being with people. Like, what replaces it? Like I, the other day, went up to Maine to visit with my grandchildren, and I got out of the car and started walking towards the house, and one of my grandchildren ran out and she squeezed my legs. My grandma name is Kins, and she screamed, "Kins." And I honestly physically felt like this, like, geyser of joy and love come up into my chest. And maybe we got to just remember that no computer's ever going to give us that feeling. I mean, it's just never going to do it. And maybe we come to our senses and remember that.
Before we finish, we have enough time to go back to some of these exercises that you have developed and use in the class and use in the book. Maybe let's pick one. And these are designed to help us probe, one of the thorniest areas here, because we've been talking about values, aptitudes, and economically viable interests. But we spent most of our time on values, I think, for very good reason, because it's really important and quite difficult. And so maybe let's pick from this menu of exercises. They have names like 6 Squared or Whose Life or Alpha Omega or Exploring Fears. Can we pick one or two of these and walk through them?
Yeah, let's do 6 Squared to start. It's one of my favorite exercises. What happens in class is I tell my students about the 6-word memoir that was originated by Ernest Hemingway when he was challenged that you couldn't write a novel in 6 words. And he said you can. And he typed out, "For sale, baby shoes, never worn." And you fast forward to 2008, and Smith Magazine and Twitter, brand new at the time, got together and they challenged the internet to write the story of their lives in 6 words. And it was the original breaking of the internet, and they just got thousands and hundreds of thousands of responses, and people sort of had to think about their life to date and write the 6-word summary of it, the title of their memoir, if you will, for their life to date. And so we do that in class, but the squared part of it is, and we do that as part of the Becoming You process, you sum up your life to date. And then I ask my students to go through an exercise, a little bit of a kind of a meditation-like exercise, except for instead of clearing your head, I ask them to get very quiet and very still, and to imagine their lives in 25 years from that date, 25 years hence, if you will, as if everything worked out, as if it was the life they'd always wanted, that nobody had edited it. They had achieved what they wanted, how they wanted, with whom they wanted, and to picture that life and sort of picture it as sort of up close, sort of what a day would feel like, and picture it from up at 10,000 feet, what would that life look like? And after I let them kind of soak in that for a few minutes of just living in and visualizing that life, that life, their ideal life 25 years hence, to stop and to imagine their life from today to that day and write the title of that memoir in 6 words. And the stunning moment comes, not infrequently without tears, where you compare the first memoir to the second memoir title. And you see the distance of the journey between the two. This tends to very powerfully pop, if you will, values, because you'll sort of see a life that was a kind of a life of living expectations and expedience for the first part of their life. And then they'll paint a small portrait of their life, and you'll see, was it eudaimonia that the new life has, or an ability to be with family, or is there something entrepreneurial about it, or is there some sort of new closeness and belonging? When you're forced to bring this down to just 6 words, it is stunning how it is absolutely impels values to come right to the surface. People go right there, but it's the process of doing these 2 steps. It's actually how I start the whole Becoming You process in class. People are really kind of caught up by how oftentimes how different the two memoir titles are.
And again, the two steps are start by thinking about your life to date. What are the 6 words that would describe it? And then envision 25 years from now, what do you want things to look like? Write that 6-word memoir, compare the two, reflect.
Yeah, exactly. Reflect deeply. What's changed? What's different? What did you do that you haven't done so far? What unlived dream, what unrealized want, what unfixed relationship, what untold story. For many people who go through this process, it's the first time that there's ever been somebody standing over them saying, imagine the life you want, don't edit yourself. Because the first thing we do when we start imagining that life is we just start editing away. I mean, this is why I always say it's better to be the author of your life than the editor. There's just so many editors around us. The world will edit us soon enough. Don't edit yourself and I'm just saying it. Look, eventually Becoming You edits a lot of things because it says what are your aptitudes and what are your interests. It asks you to edit some stuff, but let's start first by figuring out what is your heart's desire.
Suzy, I ask 2 questions at the end of every episode. One, this can be the answer. The first question sometimes has really long answers and sometimes very short answers. But it is there anything you were hoping to get to that we haven't yet gotten to?
No, I like what we got to. Thank you.
Second question is, can you just remind everybody of the name of your book and any other resources you've put out into the world, including remind us again about some of these tests that you either created or recommend?
All right, so the book is called Becoming You, The Proven Method for Crafting Your Authentic Life. And the tools that I talked about, one is called The Values Bridge. You could just find it by thevaluesbridge.com. The other is Pi 360. You can go to pi360feedback.com. But all of these resources are on my website, SuzyWelch.com. Try them out. There's free versions of everything and poke around and see what works for you.
Suzy, thank you very much for doing this. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much.